Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the very first Expert Voices of 2026. I'm very excited to be joined by Heather Thompson, the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, ITDP, more commonly known as ITDP. I've known Heather for, I don't know, I think we met maybe 15, 18 years ago. For people who don't know me, I'm Sasank Vimiri. I head the Global Secretariat for Mobilize Your City. Heather has over 20 years of leadership in sustainable transport and urban development. She collaborates with governments, planners, civil society to move cities towards more inclusive, people-friendly mobility systems. So her mission and our mission at Mobilize Your City align incredibly well. Under Heather's leadership, IDTP has advanced major reforms in public transportation planning and financing, which is our topic for today, and implementation across Africa, Asia, North America, and South America. Heather's work focuses on advancing long-term funding mechanisms for public transportation, improving financial sustainability, and integrating climate and equity considerations into investment decisions. So we're really excited to have you here, Heather. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so
Welcome.
much for having me. Yeah, thank you. It's great to start the year with a fun conversation with a great friend for so many years. Yeah, I think I was even there for the launch of Mobilize Your City so long ago, and it's great to see all of the impact that you all have been making and especially elevating the importance of sustainable urban mobility plans. Because if we don't have plans, we don't know what we're doing. So that's the core of it all, and it's been great to work with you. Thanks for having me here.
That's great. Thank you so much. It's the beginning of the year. It's January. So maybe this is a good time to ask, what are you excited for ITDP, for your work coming up this year?
Oh gosh, what am I excited about? Well, it's a big year. I've been reflecting on how the year has been so far quite different than last year when we
Mhm.
started the year. Here I am. I am an American, sitting in the US, although I am in California. But we had the election of a new president, and the pulling it back from USAID is like a big, big, big thing that impacted so many organizations around the world. But I think with a lot of challenges, it's also been an opportunity to look at new ways of doing things. And at ITDP, we launched a new strategy last year that's really putting financing for public transport at the core of what we do. So take a look at our new strategy that's on our website. We've purposely made it visible for everyone because we hope that it will help galvanize our community to focus on some of the things. And we have three very simple goals. First is to increase ridership on public transport. The second is to make sure that it's electrified. And the third is to make sure that it's well financed. And yeah, we're really excited to see a lot of new opportunities, bringing together funding and finance to make that happen. I think the introduction of electrification into the public transport or just the transport sector more broadly has brought a lot of new interests and a new approaches. So I think in times like this, it's all about how to do more with less.
Mm.
I'm squeezing those lemons, making some really great lemonade. And yeah, I think, the conversations that have already happened, including this one today, are encouraging me and all of us around ITDP to still have a lot to be excited for this year. So hopefully less surprises and more kind of knowns that we're dealing with and we're marching forward.
I think everybody's had enough surprises, no? It feels like every year we begin thinking, oh my God, the last year was so chaotic. And then the year becomes just as chaotic. So really, hopefully this year we won't head down the same direction.
It's not
You
going to
talked about
happen. Not going to
not going to
happen.
happen, no? Yeah, let's put that into the world. Not going to happen. You talked about squeezing lemons and the closure of USAID. I'm in Brussels at the moment. I work for the German Development Corporation, and there's a lot of kind of focus on this idea of how does development corporation, how does working with cities in the global south help our taxpayers or help us? And if we're not able to sort of legitimately answer that question, the lemons are getting smaller. Like the resources to be able to do this work is getting less and less. Are you facing the same thing in the US? Did you have that same pressure? Or is ITDP a little bit more insulated from these type of questions?
I wish we were insulated, maybe a little bit, because unlike you all, we're, not run by the government. I think that's one of our core strengths is being a truly international nonprofit organization. So we always try and make sure we can keep that distance to allow us to have our, own independent perspectives, but then working
Mm,
close enough to the government that hopefully we can have influence and have great partners, including the German government. But I think that's, really the stress that we see all around the world. And it's, how can we make sure that we're looking out for, economic interests, looking out for opportunities for new markets and growth. And I think other issues like, energy security are coming up. We see change in trade patterns and supply chains. There's lots of questions about, just resource security and everybody's asking, how do we squeeze the lemon out, making lemonade out of fewer lemons, as you said. And then we also see less interest in things like climate change, air
mm,
quality. We still see coming up in other environmental issues, but certainly not where we were going, which was more universal interest in climate change. But I think we can talk about all of those things in different ways. I mean, ultimately, we're here to drive more livable cities, more public transportation, and there's so many reasons we do that. And at the core of it, it is about the right economic development that meets the needs of the people. So there's so many ways that we can talk about these things to try and make the point. And it at the end of the day, it's about moving people and moving goods. And at the core of that is the economy and jobs. And when we grow the economy and we grow jobs, that comes back in terms of taxes and market access. So I think we have the benefit of a lot of different messages to put out there, depending on what our audience wants to hear. And yeah, together as a community, we can bring the data forward and make the strong case that our agenda is their agenda.
that's great. Is there, I mean, let's go into that third part of your new strategy about the financing and
Yeah.
just to sort of start at the fundamentals, something a little bit basic. We talk a lot about financing, but we know that public transportation everywhere, but especially in the global south, relies a lot also on government transfers. Can you lay out a little bit for me, for us, thinking about the difference between funding and financing? So when you talk about financing public transportation, are you looking
Yeah.
at the full scope and how do you think about the different sort of sources?
Yeah, good question. And I know you have lots of experience in finance yourself, so I'm sure you could answer this question. But yeah, we talk about funding and finance again, are the third pillar of our strategy. We have goals for both funding and financing because they are different and they are both so fundamental. So funding is really government, usually government money, right? Government money being dedicated to fund whether it's infrastructure or operations, and we'll just focus on public transport because of course that's what we're here to talk about. But government funding, and that funding can come from the national level, it can come from the state level, it can even come with support from international governments, which is different than financing. And financing essentially is, again, trying to squeeze more from the lemon, right? Financing is basically a form of loans or other ways that you take your money and you try to replicate it, try to leverage it, try to grow it. So you're not being given the money, you're actually borrowing the money in different structures and then having to pay the money back eventually in some way. And of course, there's all kinds of, rates that go along with that. Sometimes they'll be, very low because this is financing that's in the interest of the public. Or, if you go out to borrow money as an individual, it might be really high interest rates. So there's all kinds of ways of structuring financing. And really, I think that is the challenge is within the sector to be able to leverage the funding in a way that brings in more financing. And then do it for different entities in our supply chain that may have more risk or less risk
Mm,
associated
mm,
with them. So we often hear about, some of the big cities like Santiago or Bogota or Sao Paulo being able to grow their electric bus fleets. Mexico City, so many of the big capital cities. Well, they've been in the business of doing these sorts of things for a long time. So when they go to borrow money, they're going to have less risk associated with them. So it's going to be relatively easy for them to borrow money and pay it back. They're well known. Whereas if you're a private operator, which in many
mm,
places where we're working, the bus sector actually isn't owned and operated by the city. They're owned and operated by small private sector operators. They're considered a high risk person, right? A high risk
mm,
business. So loaners don't want to give the money to them without charging them a lot of interest that they can't afford. So that's the conundrum that we have, is how do we make sure that those private sector businesses, those smaller enterprises, even smaller cities, are given money in a way that is, you know, feasible for them to take the money. And when it comes to public transportation, especially with electrification, one of the benefits of electrification is that it reduces the cost of operations. If you run an e-bus compared to a traditional bus, you're going to save your money over time because you don't have to do so much maintenance over time. But the upfront cost of the
mm,
bus is much higher. So basically, you're able to pay back that money over time, but you need the money up front. And that's
mm.
the problem we have. We don't have that lemonade. We have a lot of lemons. So how do we get the lemonade out up front so we
Yeah,
can sell our lemonade and, pay for our lemons? So it's all about finding ways that we can structure deals and provide loan guarantees and other mechanisms, bringing together different parties, whether it's government, private sector lenders that are willing to take a little bit of risk because of the upside, and provide some security so that everybody can take those loans to pay for that upfront cost and then pay it back over time. And those are some of the new business models that we see, where there's new
mm.
asset leasing models and kind of like almost like micro lending, where you pay as you go for a bus, by small businesses or even large businesses. So yeah, that's maybe the difference between funding and finance, and a little bit of kind of how we see it playing out in the world of public transport these days.
That's really interesting. I mean, there was a lot there.
Sorry,
And
hopefully
I
not
like
too
the
much.
no, not too much. I think that it's one of the, I think, important elements that you mentioned is how do you use the funding to leverage more financing? Because we know that the public funding won't be sufficient for all of our investments, neither the capital investments or the O&M costs for the entire duration of the project. Do you have any good examples from ITDP where you feel like that was a pretty particularly good use of using government funding to leverage financing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's really the crux of the discussion right now is, as you said, it's the operation OpEx versus the CapEx, and how do we leverage the funding? And again, we see successful cities around the world. I mentioned a few already. I think
Mm,
in Latin America, we see a lot of advancements of models. But we're also seeing a lot of interesting things begin to happen in Africa and India, where there is a leveraging of funding. But those new business models are just sort of coming up in the last, say, 5 years. And now it's about how do we replicate those models, and how do we take them from the big cities that are considered credit worthy and
yeah.
going down to the more complicated models where we need new blended finance to deal with maybe what's perceived as higher risk. But we are seeing a lot of interesting opportunities there. One that we're really excited to be part of at ITDP is a new mitigation action facility that we are just launching in Latin America, in Brazil. And
Mhm.
it's with European funding and other government funding. It's a blended pool, which is bringing in about 80 million euros, with the idea that it will leverage about 450 million euros. And the
Okay.
idea is to focus on 4 cities in Brazil, not Sao Paulo, that already has a big, beautiful e-bus fleet, but instead some medium-sized cities. So Rio, Belo Horizonte, Curitiba, and Salvador, that just won
Hmm.
the STA, the Sustainable Transport Award this year. We're very excited for Salvador. Um, and the idea is we're going to double the e-bus fleets in Brazil through these 4 large cities, but to show how we can leverage that funding through new business models. And yet to be determined how that might happen, but thinking about leasing the assets, other ways that you can leverage rather than just full on purchasing the buses. Leasing is one of the models where you kind of structure the business model differently, so that you might be leasing the bus or even just leasing the battery, and then kind of paying it back over time is essentially the model. So, we see more and more of these kind of partnerships that are bringing in government money with the idea of, again, leveraging the private sector. In this case, there's also a national development bank in Brazil that will be part of the effort, the BNDES large bank. But we see similar things like that happening elsewhere in the world.
That's great. I mean, you were ITDP was a instrumental key partner in the e-bus mission, the TUMI e-bus mission with 100,000
Yeah.
buses being procurement ready. Does something like that still continue to exist in the financing space? Like, do you have sort of ready to disseminate platforms for the financing model that's being developed in Brazil?
I wish. I wish I could say yes. I mean, we do have this mitigation action facility in Brazil, which is really exciting. We have been working with BNDES to help them think about how to ramp up e-bus financing, which again will take government funding and leverage it through financing. So we looked at all the medium-sized cities in the country to
Mm,
see, if they were to turn over the fleets, which fleets are in the most need, what would be, where could we bring in the most air quality, climate benefits to people. So kind of preparing and also thinking about opportunities for pooled procurement. So rather than, another real advantage is, rather than one operator or one city at a time trying to make a purchase for buses, which is a lengthy negotiation process, and are they going to get the right prices? And, as a manufacturer, you're making 10 buses, 100 buses,
mm,
it's not that many. Whereas if you can pull procurement, bring more cities or more operators together to have a bigger purchase, then it brings down the cost. And so with this program with BNDES, we've also been looking at how can the buses be more uniform, more similar between cities, so that you start, instead of every bus being designed, uniquely, that
mm.
you have some different models, so the manufacturers have more certainty in what they're doing, and you can bring down the cost. So interesting things that we're doing that serve as platforms. But you bring up the TUMI eBus mission, and that program, that partnership was really fundamental to getting so much of this started. Like these cities that I just mentioned in Brazil, a lot of them were the focus of the TUMI eBus mission. So the political willingness is already there. The understanding of why e-buses are better
Mm,
is
mm,
already there. They were able to test enough buses on the street to understand what their needs are, to feel confident in the technology, and to move forward. So Salvador, again, we're super excited to have won the STA this year, the Sustainable Transport Award. And it really goes back to, the trajectory that they've been on, with support of so many organizations. And of course, they're just doing great work there, building up their bus rapid transit systems. And not only public transport, they're also investing in walking and cycling and urban development that is more compact. And of course, that's super fundamental to getting all of this right. So it's always great when you can look back and see how things have influenced and built upon one another. And the To Me E-Bus mission from the German government, with the German government support, has been absolutely fundamental. So if I could put a shout out there, hey, we're making jobs, we're making development. Please bring back the To Me E-Bus mission. We would love to have it again. But meanwhile, we'll build on that success.
That's a great shout out. But you also mentioned walking and cycling, which is really important. And I think ITDP is now doing also a pilot on walking and cycling for one of the Mobilize Your City cities. And a few years ago, you prepared also some training products for us on financing active mobility. I think the challenge is, as we've sort of established some models that can be replicated for e-buses, and where those models I feel like are really starting to scale, we're facing different challenges in financing active mobility and smaller scale infrastructure, right? Can you tell me a little bit about what ITDP is doing and thinking about financing more small scale active mobility infrastructure?
Sure. Well, I know there's a lot of great people out there thinking about this. So hopefully we'll keep coming up with new great ways of approaching this and new models that, again, kind of blend different financing together. But I think one of the things that we have found to be kind of one of the bigger insights of the last years, which seems so obvious, but we have the challenge of when we're building walking and especially cycling infrastructure, we know that a lane that goes from somewhere to nowhere is not helpful, right? We need the network. And really, with all public transport and all urban mobility, we need the network of things. We need the system to really work together. And it's, the benefits are exponential, right? When you start really building on the system is when you really get the benefits. But how do you get from here to there, right? And what we found with active mobility is you just got to build it. And sometimes you'll have, bike lanes that start somewhere and go nowhere. And then eventually you can put all the pieces together. So, cities just one step at a time, go for it. But
Mm,
also to try and attach it to other infrastructure projects. So trying to get financing for small cycling projects, even though there's so many benefits that we can measure and show, and we have a tool that's available to do that, because we wanted to make sure we could make the case economically, whether it's healthcare benefits or just development benefits, air quality benefits, so many benefits. But what's that financial interest to begin with? And often it's hard to get that for active mobility. But what you can do is piggyback on other investment projects that are happening. So whether it's in public transport, or maybe it's actually in, cleaning up sewer systems and water drainage systems. We know a lot of cities are having a lot of issues with water drainage, right? And they want to redo all of their underground systems. Well, if you're tearing up that road and you're financing a new road, make sure when you put that road back in that it's got good walking and cycling infrastructure. And, we have all the designs you need in the world. There's so many experts out there that can tell you how to develop a good streetscape. So take advantage of those opportunities when you see that financing happening to piggyback on them. And, especially in the investments around public transport, whether it's bus rapid transit or metro or trains, I think that's a huge opportunity for piggybacking and making sure that especially the stations around those systems are well designed.
mm,
Walking, cycling, wayfinding, public space. Not only is that good for your city, it will allow you to attract and get riders onto those metros, onto those trains, which increases your ridership. And with that, you get more money for your public transport system. And that just helps with funding and finance, right? You bring in more revenue, and then that revenue can be recycled. And hopefully some of that money can also be dedicated back to that urban space around your public transport system. Again, it's all about building up the system, right? And we've seen with one of our STA winners, the Tianjin, which got a bunch of financing from the Asian Development Bank, World Bank for their metro, but they weren't seeing a lot of ridership. And so we invested in that in the space around the stations. The ridership went up, and it ended up being one of, I think to date, still one of the World Bank's greatest investment in active mobility. And, it was great for the city, but also just great for the financing of the project.
That's incredible. Congratulations. Maybe a couple last questions. The 20 half an hour goes by really fast. So one of the
It
things that's
does.
really, I know, doesn't it? There's a lot of, I guess, interest in deploying more financial de-risking instruments. And I have the feeling that both from like the supply side and the demand side, there's not a great understanding of, how to deploy these instruments, especially when you have sort of government sovereign guarantees for larger infrastructure projects. Like then you don't have to do any complicated structuring of projects, right? What is your experience? Like this new kind of big wave of offer of financial de-risking instruments in order to make the most out of funding to leverage more financing. Do you see them being deployed at scale? What are the bottlenecks, and how can we help?
Yeah, great question. I think there's so much opportunity here. And yes, we see them being deployed, but not yet enough, I think. And kind of going back to the earlier points in the conversation, often we see the kind of loan guarantees and other mechanisms being in support of, cities and governments that actually aren't associated with a lot of risk. We need these mechanisms to be deployed in that next round of players that may again be perceived to have higher risk, but actually at the end of the day, they don't. It's a new thing. They can't look back on history and prove that they've done this before because they haven't,
Hmm.
because they've never
Right.
gotten the support that they need. It's always that issue. Like, how do you get started, right? And so thinking about medium-sized cities, thinking about private operators, but again, this is when we can pool these operators together, again, whether they're cities or private entities, so that the risk is being spread between a pool of players. And I think that's a new opportunity that is really ripe. And we
Hmm.
see these, like the mitigation action facility I mentioned before, that's pulling four cities together. There's models that are being deployed in places like Africa that are really, focused on private operators that might be operators that have like two or three or 10 buses, or maybe a single individual business. It could even be a business on an electric motorcycle. So you
Hmm.
have these providers that are pooling funding and financing for multiple entities. So, them as a lender, they're less likely to not get paid back, right? Because maybe one or two of the operators in
Right.
that pool will default, but the rest will pay back. So as a lender, you're spreading your risks, and as a borrower, you're getting to kind of leverage the rest of the players in your pool. And that pool can be a very well structured thing, or it can be something that is really kind of, again, individually based. There's a lot of interesting models, again, to think about Africa, players like Bosigo, Ampersand. In Africa, VG Mobility is one, operating in Latin America, that are, they're deploying the capital and they're doing that risk moderation and pulling the players together. So I think there's a lot of excitement of tying that to pooled procurement and then the new business models that we see.
Super interesting stuff. I mean, I think you talked about the pooled instruments, using de-risking instruments. I'm wondering, I feel like we have a good models for scaling the electric mobility, especially the bus sector. If we were to talk again in 5 years, where do you think we'd be looking back and thinking that worked really well? We cracked a really tough nut.
Great question. Great question. Well, I do hope that once we see enough of this kind of large scale pulled procurement with different models, that provide enough certainty to the market so that the market's like, you know what, we're not going to produce those conventional buses anymore. There's just no market for it. We've hit the tipping point of the scale, and we just see electric buses on the market. And I think in 5 years, my hope is we will see that tipping point, right? We've been all focused on 2030 for climate goals, and I think the real goal is to get to that tipping point by 2030. And I think the other thing that we really need is we've been talking a lot now about demand side measures and financing support, which is so critical because again, if you don't have that upfront capital, you can't do anything. You're just stuck. But the other is to have supply side regulation. So when the market sees the certainty of this direction and the government see the certainty, which I think is already happening, then they'll start putting in regulations and policies that say, we will only import, only manufacture electric buses. So zero emission vehicle mandates, other targets like that. That will be like the true tipping point. And again, I think working on both sides, supply side, demand side, with finance as that real sweet spot in the middle, we can get to those tipping points, I think, in the next 5 years. So we're hopeful. Again, the Toomey e-bus mission really had, I think its goal was 100,000 buses. So I'm not sure how close we are there, but we're getting
You
close.
exceeded.
If we include China, we're there. If we take out China, maybe we're almost there, but certainly in the next 5 years.
That's great. Thank you so much. I mean, here's to working on tipping points in the next 5 years and getting there. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I found it
Thank you
really
so much for
interesting.
having me. Yeah, thank you.
I'm looking forward to seeing you. You'll be in DC in a few weeks, I guess.
Yes, we can see each other in person and continue the conversation. That would be great.
Yeah, that's great. So I think my colleagues will put a link to your strategy and some other publications that we have on this topic of economic appraisals and thinking about the difference between funding and financing. But it was great to catch up with you and to hear your thoughts and to hear the work that ITDP is doing. Thanks, Heather.
Well, great. And thank you for the opportunity to share. And yeah, we're digging into this. We have some new resources that will be coming out in the next couple of months, as well as resources that already exist. But yeah, we're digging into this with partners like you and others to want to make sure what we're learning is accessible to everyone. And please tune in for the Sustainable Transport Award. And if you're watching this later, you can always find it on our channel on YouTube. But I think Salvador was one winner. They are the winner. And then Santiago, Chile, which has been done so much in this area, is an honorable mention, along with Kochi, India, which has done some really interesting things around electric marine transport. So take a look at those. There's going to be a lot of information on with case studies. And I think it's always great to really see what a city has done and understand more about it. So there'll be a lot on that too coming up. So thank you so much for your partnership. And again, thanks for this opportunity to share.
It's great to see you. Thank you so much. Thanks,
All
Heather.
right. Take care.
Talk to you later. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.